Hello, Sooner Nation, OU Insider subscribers, Brian Clinton fanatics, people who don't have anything better to do on a Thursday. My name is Jesse Crittenden, and this is the latest episode of the Oklahoma Drill, a new podcast brought to you by OU Insider and the Rivals Network. I, of course, am here with my co-host, Brian Clinton. Brian, sir, it is Wednesday, 1:20 p.m. as we record this. How are you, sir?
I'm great, man. It's midweek. If we're hoping that Brian Clinton Fanatics is who is going to make up the base of our podcast watch group, I think we're going to be sorely missed.
I disagree. I disagree with that. You got to. You're selling yourself way too short. Okay, selling yourself way too short. How are things up in Collinsville, America?
They're doing good, man. We had some rain yesterday, finally. So whenever I get around to mowing, I'm not going to have dust all over my face. It'll be great.
Speaking of the rain, man, I don't know about you and people who are listening to this can probably hear it, but my allergies the last couple of days, it's been brutal, dude.
It's terrible.
Yeah. It feels like everybody I've run into the last couple of days, it's the same thing. It's allergies. And I like cold weather. I'm all about fall. I'm not a big summer guy. But I always forget when it changes so drastically like this, the side effects of that.
Every fall and every spring, I like stuff up for a week, and it's starting to hit me right now. So right before the Tulsa game, unfortunately.
Well, but you know what? When that comes, that means we're heading into prime fall football weather, and
Right.
it is the best time of year. So with all that, man, we did our first episode last week. I think it went great. I think people who listen to it or people who are here for the first time, they know what to expect from us. We're going to talk about all things OU football. We're talking about the press conferences. We're talking about the games. We're talking about the players' availabilities, all that stuff. And so we're here today. We're gonna preview a little bit of OU's game against Tulsa this coming Saturday at 2:30 p.m. I believe it's on ESPN2. It's on ESPN or ESPN2. I think it's ESPN2. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about some of the press conferences that have happened this week. But Brian, I think where we need to start is with our first segment. We called it Thursday Thoughts last week, but I'm nixing that because we're recording this on Wednesdays most weeks. So Thursday Thoughts is off the table. We're going to, again, this is not set in stone, but we're going to go to Wednesday Wisdom, where we're going to talk a little bit about OU's 28-11 win against SMU on Saturday. Now, Brian, you were on the field. I was in the press box. Pretty interesting game. OU jumped out to a pretty early lead after Peyton Bowen's punt block, but SMU hung around, cut it to 14-11 pretty early in the fourth quarter. I think you could feel the nervousness in the stadium. And then, obviously the offense scores a couple of touchdowns late to kind of put that game out of reach. But Brian, as you're leaving the field, as you're kind of, the final seconds are dwindling down, you got to get set up in the red room for availability. What was your main takeaway walking off the field? A win's a win, I'm sure, but what was your overall thought?
So most games, it feels like here in recent history, most games have been really graded by OU fans or by Sooner Nation based on how many points Oklahoma put up, just because defense has really been an afterthought for a while in Norman, and not by choice. It's just you've had to outscore folks for years now, and this was one of those situations where you look at the scoreboard and it's 28-11. I'll go back to a conversation I had after the game. Somebody was concerned and called me about the game. Why are we only putting up 28 points? What's going on? Why, what's this? What's that? And I said, okay, look at it this way. If the score was 48-31, you would feel a lot more comfortable because that's what you've been used to seeing. But it's 28-11. And then I go home and I find out that 11 points is the lowest point total that SMU's had in like 6 or 7 seasons. So what I took away from it was, I think that in 2 weeks we've seen this team win games in 2 different ways. You absolutely dominated offensively, obviously defensively as well in week 1, but you were forced to play defense and lean on that defense in this game and lean on special teams a little bit. And it really it solidified what I felt was that this team has a better feeling of what it takes to win football games. And so when you see them put those 14 points up late in the fourth quarter and really put this game away, that's not something that we got to see from them very often last year, if at all. So I was pleased with the game, regardless of it being, the final score of what it was.
Yeah, a lot of good points there. And you mentioned 48-31, which listeners from the first episode will remember that was my prediction. And even though I was incorrect about my 48-31 prediction, I was correct that OU would win by 17. So I'm going to take half a victory lap here. But yeah, it was an interesting. You bring up a lot of good things there, and kind of let's segue that a little bit into the defense, because I think ultimately, and we're going to talk about the offense. But let's talk about the defense, because I think that was the main, positive takeaway from all of this. And you alluded to it. I mean, holding a good SMU team, a good SMU offense to 11 points, it was really, was pretty impressive. Now, that's not to say SMU didn't have some success. I mean, they actually outgained OU in total yards. I think they had 367. There were some drives that SMU had some real success, and I think we're posed to threaten to score a little bit, but there were big plays that OU's defense made. That was the thing, and Danny Stutzman actually said it after the game, was this, the defense bent a little bit, but it didn't break, and that's what you wanted to see, is not getting discouraged, not just let SMU go through. I think there was that one drive in the third quarter where it looks like SMU's breaking off a huge running play, and Key Lawrence comes in, strips the ball, or punches it out is more accurate. Danny Stutzman recovers it. Those are huge plays. That's a play last year I don't think this defense makes, and those are the kind of plays you need, because it's not about being perfect. It's not about holding SMU's defense to 10 total yards, but you got to be able to make those kind of plays to make a difference. But either way, Danny Stutzman led with 17 tackles. I thought he was incredible. Really good performances by, a few different guys. But Brian, what stood out to you about the defense? You alluded to it there, holding SMU to 11 points. But what was there? Was there a player? Was there a position group? What stood out to you? And maybe where did we see this defense play well that maybe we wouldn't have seen them play well a year ago?
So I think I'd be remiss if I didn't start by giving Danny Stutzman his flowers. I mean, he earned National Defensive Player of the Year, or Defensive Player of the Week, we hope, for the year, and looked really good doing it. He was one away from eclipsing his career total, or his career high in a single game for tackles. There was 17, but I think what I really took away from this was SMU is a team that tries to not only stretch you vertically and horizontally on the field, but they also threw a lot at Oklahoma. There were a lot of different formations. They threw a lot of different trick plays. There was a fumble rooski at one point. They had some reverses and things of that nature. And OU was in position. And that was the biggest thing for me, was that regardless of what SMU threw at them, it seemed that Oklahoma's defense was prepared. They knew what they were supposed to do. They knew where they were supposed to be, and that's credit to obviously the defensive staff. But with the guys that you have out there that are new, we've heard over and over how many guys are making their first and second games, or their starts for Oklahoma. Danny Stutzman getting those guys in place, I think he was just as big of an impact in that regard as he was making plays on his own. So it was really impressive just to see them lined up in the right spot. And I know that sounds small, but last year there were so many times when that wasn't the case. So it was a really good sign for Oklahoma.
That's a really good point. And you go back and watch games last year, the amount of pre-snap confusion you see on OU's defense, guys that they're not sure where they're supposed to be, they're not sure where their assignment is. That happened so much last year, and I think it's one of those things, especially in a complicated system or complex system like Venables, you can't afford to not know where you're supposed to be before the snap. I mean, really against any offense, but especially, I mean, where everybody's got to be in sync. I think that's a good point. I'm going to throw a couple of key stats at you. And again, 2 games is not a big enough sample size to establish season long trends. We've got a long ways to go still to figure out who this team really is. But I'm going to throw a couple of key stats at you, Brian. The first one is third down defense. I actually think that's something that hasn't been talked enough about. OU held SMU to 4 of 16 on third downs. That was massive. It was massive because not only was third down defense, an absolute Achilles heel for this OU defense a year ago, but as I mentioned earlier, that SMU offense had some drives where they moved the ball pretty well, but it was OU getting stops on third down that really made the difference there. There's that, and they were really good, obviously, on third downs against Arkansas State. I think Arkansas State was 2 of 12, if my memory serves me right. So through 2 games, OU's been really good on third downs. The other one is rushing yards. SMU finished with 117 rushing yards on 34 attempts, just 3.4 yards per carry. Again, OU was not just the worst rushing defense in the Big 12 last year, they were one of the worst rushing defenses, period, in all of college football last year. And again, they're going to face tougher competition. But I think through 2 games, OU has given up, I think less than 170 yards on on about 60 attempts. So their yards per carry average is good. You can see Danny Stutzman, Kip Lewis, Jaron Canick, Kobe McKenzie, even Peyton Bowen. You can see these guys rushing in. But is there? I mean, what did you see maybe from that third down defense? Maybe it goes back to what we were saying. Maybe just having a better idea of where we're supposed to be. But did you notice that on the field? Like, man, OU's just getting stops on third down.
So I think the biggest thing or the biggest reason for some of that success is that, you know, the defensive line may not be necessarily penetrating the way that people are hoping that they would, but what they're doing is they're forcing offensive linemen to hold blocks. They're forcing double teams. And that comes with obviously the added girth that they talked about this offseason, having bigger guys there. But what that's doing is it's allowing those guys like Danny Stutzman and Jaron Kinnick and Peyton Bowen and guys in the back seven to come up and make plays. You're letting those guys run free, and so that really helps with keeping those rushing yards to a minimum. And the other thing is when you do that, you make teams one dimensional. It puts them in more predictable situations on third down. When you put guys in situations where they have to throw the ball when it's 3rd and 8 or longer, it's a lot easier to tee off, send your guys after the quarterback and not have to worry about the threat of a run. And you can really use those defensive linemen to really penetrate and get after the quarterback. So I think what you're seeing is all of these little bitty intangibles that you didn't see Oklahoma use last year. They're able to really put them all together and help them get off the field on third down when they just couldn't do it last year.
That's a really good point. And Venables talked about it over and over. And sometimes I think it's easy to think of things as coach speak, but he was like, if you want to get better on third down, you got to be good on first and second down. And so I think I think that goes along with what you're saying. Before we transition to the offense, I'm going to mention real quick, the snap counts on defense per Pro Football Focus. I think this is going to be something that's really interesting to look at as we move forward, as we see maybe this coaching staff try to settle on rotations, who should be out on the field, things like that. Woody Washington led the team with 82. Then Jaron Canick and Billy Bowman and Danny Stutzman were all second, third, and fourth with 69, followed by Kenai Walker with 66 snaps. Kenai Walker, a guy that didn't play a ton last year, but maybe is showing some, getting some trust from the coaching staff. But that's going to be really interesting to see looking forward, particularly on the defensive line. We look at the starters there. Jacob Lacey got his first start on Saturday. Again, a guy that dealt with a medical situation during the offseason. Pretty interesting to see not only that he got the start. I thought he played pretty decently for the most part, but that defensive line is really where we're seeing a lot of different movement. But anyways, just wanted to note that. Let's move to the offense, Brian, because I think that's maybe where, I don't know if controversy is probably too strong of a word, but that is where some of the lows of the game really came from. And it was pretty interesting to see Because look, 28 points, hard to complain about that. And I do think that given how explosive OU's offenses have been over the last several years, I do think it's easy to get warped around
Mhm.
what this offense is supposed to look like when really what we saw for 5 years is not actually normal. It really isn't. But it's hard to complain about 28 points. But you think, Brian, that first touchdown came, on a very short field after the Peyton Bowen pump block, which we're going to talk more about Peyton Bowen later. But after that, Peyton Bowen pump block set up a short field, and then they had one scoring drive in the second quarter that was pretty good. I mean, they went 94 yards. That was the Tawee Walker drive. They just kept feeding him, and so that was a really good drive. But and then that first touchdown of the fourth quarter, they went 75 yards, but that last touchdown again was because OU's defense and Peyton Bowen forced that fourth down stop, set them up on a short field. So, and you look at, I mean, the second and third quarters in particular were kind of a slog, Brian. I mean, I think heading into the fourth quarter, Dylan Gabriel only had 88 yards passing. It just didn't look good. And again, it's hard to complain about a 17-point win. It's hard to complain about 28 points on the board, but it just didn't look smooth. It didn't look great, especially as much as you would expect it to be. But Brian, what was your, let's start with the passing game. What did you see there? Because Dylan Gabriel's final line, 19 to 27, 176 yards, 4 touchdowns, looks pretty good. I thought for the most part he played okay, but did you get the sense on the field that things were they just seemed stiff, like nothing was smooth?
Yeah, and it kind of seemed like anytime they got going for just a second for a couple of plays, you'd have a drop or you would have something that just kind of threw them out of rhythm. It just felt like they never really got going. Because I mean, when we have seen this Jeff Levy offense really work at its highest efficiency, it's because they get in rhythm. He has us. I don't know how he calls plays particularly, but I just know that whenever he gets in rhythm, it feels as if the offense just moves fluidly down the field any way that it wants to. And there have been games at times in his tenure as the offensive coordinator here where that's just not the case when they just can't get going. And this is one of those situations. I think a lot of what it had to do with was, you know, as you mentioned, they only had 27 pass attempts. You had 47 rushing attempts. And so, roughly two-thirds of what you're trying to do is run the ball. And, 4 yards a carry is okay, but it's not what we've grown used to seeing from Oklahoma's offensive line. And so I think that probably played a factor in it as well. Um, at the end of the day, Dylan Gabriel was efficient as you can ask for. I think 3 or 4 of his incompletions were drops. So again, he was really consistent. But I think what you saw was some missed opportunities. Going back and watching the game, um, I try to do it every week, and there were some times where you had guys running down the field open, and maybe it was because SMU brought pressure just enough time to keep Dylan from being able to get the ball down the field, or he just maybe missed him a couple of times. So I think you saw them really limit what they were able to do vertically in the passing game, and that'll definitely be something that they're working on this week for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll point out something here also about the passing game. I mean, Angelo Anthony through 2 games has been the number one wide receiver. I mean, it's not even close. He's got 10 catches, I believe, for 142 yards and a touchdown. Next closest is Drake Stoops with 6 catches. Obviously, he missed a lot of that week 1 game, but we look at the box score, Brian, and Angelo Anthony had 7 catches. He had the drop on the second play of the game that made up for it with that touchdown in the first quarter, but he had 9 targets, 7 catches. Only 2 other receivers caught a pass, Brian, which was, again, you're talking about the discrepancy between the passing attempts and the rushing attempts. That's going to happen. But when we heard all offseason about this, how deep this wide receiver room is and how many options they were, and what we even saw in that first game where I think 9 different receivers caught a pass. Jaquays Petaway led the room with 9 catches. Didn't even see a
Mhm.
snap against SMU. Again, Jalil Farouk didn't catch a pass against Arkansas State. He caught 2 passes against SMU. Obviously, that touchdown in the fourth quarter was really huge, but again, only 2 targets on the day. Drake Stoops caught 2 passes, but no Nick Anderson, no Jaden Gibson, no Jaquace Petaway, no Gavin Freeman. Those guys didn't play a ton of snaps, and again, in Petaway's case, didn't play any snaps at all. So I think if you're asking me now, there's an argument to be made that they're not trying to show the whole playbook. But at the same time, you don't want to, like, to me, you don't want to intentionally limit yourself for the sake of limiting yourself. And I think that wide receiver room has talent, but there's not a whole lot of experience there. And to me, if you want to get those guys ready, these are the games to get them involved. So I don't know, Brian, is it overreacting? Is it, oh, we're gonna go into Tulsa, those, everyone's gonna catch a billion passes and it's gonna be fine? Or was it troubling at all to see only 3 receivers catch a pass? Jilla Farouk's not, isn't really involved. Those other guys aren't seeing snaps.
Yeah, I was concerned. It was a mystery because I mean, how excited? Just personally, I was super excited for what we saw from Jaden Gibson in week one. Just for a kid that struggled with some confidence last year and even into spring, and then he goes and makes 2 big contested catches for huge plays for OU. Yes, it was against Arkansas State, but we're talking about a kid that's really making a difference in the real way in a college football game, and the immense amount of confidence that comes with catches like that is great. And then, like you said, just gone. We didn't hear anything from him last week, and
He played
so
6 snaps.
you're right. See,
Six snaps.
and that's you know, again, I'm not the offensive coordinator at Oklahoma, but you do have to ask, like, what's the deal? Why are guys like him and Nick Anderson not getting at least a look or two every game? Is it? Are you really trying to hide the playbook? I don't think that. I mean, you can use that. It was against SMU, but at the same time, this game was 14-11 in the fourth quarter. So uh, I don't know. I don't know what the real answer to that is. But we've got to see more. We've got to see more in the passing game than what we saw last week if Oklahoma's going to live up to this expectation that they've built.
No, I agree with you. Again, look, offense did what it needed to do to win the game, and that's ultimately what happened. They scored 28 points. But, when we're looking at this wide receiver room, what are you waiting for? Deploying them against
Mm.
Texas or Oklahoma State? I mean, these are the games that I think are really beneficial to get those guys going. So I think, again, what could be a blowout against Tulsa, there are still going to be things to look for, which here we're going to segue. I was going to ask you about the running back room, but we're going to kind of combine, looking at that SMU game, we're going to kind of combine that with this next segment here. Again, unofficial title. Brian, you and I need to do a bigger discussion about what these segment names are, because I don't think they're very snappy, and when we can figure out something better. Okay, that's why ask Parker Thune, our colleague, the amount of times I've asked him for headline suggestions, because he is way better at that stuff than I am. But we're going to transition to this other, to this second segment called "What's Happening Now," where we're going to take a look more at maybe what are the coordinators said in the press conferences? What has Brent Venables said? What have the players said during media availabilities? We're going to kind of combine the running game from SMU with this segment, with maybe what Jeff Lebby said in his press conference on Monday. And what he said was, we want to get Javonte Barnes and Gavin Sawchuk more involved. He said we want to get 2 and 27 going. Well, you want to know why he wants to get them going? Because against SMU, Javonte Barnes recorded 2 carries. And I think he caught one pass for -3 yards. So 3 total touches for Javonte Barnes. Gavin Sawchuk played, I think, 2 snaps, carried the ball once for 1 yard. This running back room is really interesting to look at, Brian, because again, it's not about complaining. The running backs were, as a whole, the OU rushing offense was decent against SMU. Tawi Walker has been pretty dang good, Brian. 21 carries, 117 yards. There were stretches of that game where Tawi Walker was simply the only consistent source of offense. He's still a walk-on. But through 2 games, he leads this team in rushing yards. He leads this team in carries. So let's just quickly talk about what do you expect from that running back room? I mean, through 2 weeks, it's been pretty interesting.
So I guess my evaluation of what's happened so far would be you've heard Coach Venables talk about Tawee Walker being available. And I think if you kind of read into that a little bit, obviously he's been a guy that he's built to withstand the he's built to withstand the pressures and the grind of fall camp and what it means to get ready and get up and going. And you saw Javante Barnes and Gavin Sawchuk really deal with some injuries this offseason and that stretched into fall camp. And so having a guy like Walker that can tote the rock, 30 times over the first 2 weeks, um, despite it being against lesser opponents, I think that really gives you an opportunity if you're Coach Murray or Coach DeMarco Murray to get him going, give him his flowers for lack of a better term for being there and being available and doing what he needs to do. But it's also given Gavin Sawchuk and Javante Barnes 2 more weeks to get their bodies right. And I made this point in my pregame or in my preview for Tulsa, the scouting report that Oklahoma had better. This is the game that you're going to have to really get things going with the running back room because the next 3 weeks are going to really test you as far as the offensive line and the running game goes because Cincinnati's defensive line is quite possibly the best in the Big 12. They have a returning All American at defensive tackle, and they've got, I believe, a first team All American conference All Player last year at edge. They're really good against the run, and so you've got them. You've got Iowa State, who's always good defensively, and then obviously what we saw against Texas, their defensive line looks incredible as well. So you really need to build some confidence and get those guys going now, because if you don't, the competition steps up in a big way defensively, and you've got three really tough opponents coming up that are going to push you if you don't push first.
No, really good points. I agree with all that. And I agree with you. I do think Javante Barnes and Gavin Sawchuk's usage the first 2 weeks has been definitely at least injury related in the sense of they're really being cautious with those guys. And I think the other part of it too is Tawee Walker's been really good. Marcus Major caught, that last touchdown to really put things away. So again, I don't know if my outlook on the room has necessarily changed. But this is when, maybe Javante Barnes and Gavin Sawchuk really are your most talented running backs, but Tawee Walker's kind of thrown a wrench in
Mhm.
things, but also you need to get those two guys on the field. I think this running back room is a little bit more complicated. It's going to be a little bit it's going to be a little bit more interesting to kind of shift through than I thought it was going to be, which is what, and to Javante Barnes's credit, we talked to him on Tuesday night. Javante Barnes was all team first. He was all, hey, I'm here ready for my opportunity, but Tawee's been great. Marcus has been great. Me and Gavin are keeping ourselves ready. It's just about doing what we need to do for the team. And I think that's the kind of stuff you want to hear. You don't want jealousy or selfishness seeping in. And even though I think Javante Barnes expects to have a big role, I think he's still keeping that team first mindset. That's the kind of stuff you want to hear. Brian, we're going to transition here to our last segment, which is called Saturday Synopsis, which Parker gave me a hard time for last week. But this is basically just where we're going to talk for just a couple of minutes about this upcoming game against Tulsa. Again, it's 2:30 p.m. Central on Saturday, I think on ESPN2. OU is nearly a 4-touchdown favorite, Brian. I do think, even though it is on the road, it is the first road test. Again, no disrespect to Tulsa, but I think SMU is by far the hardest competition OU is going to face in non-conference play. This should be a game by all accounts. OU should win pretty easily. But all of that being said, Brian, I think defensively the main thing is are Deshaun McCullough and Justin Harrington going to be available? I think it's, based on what Brent Venables said on Tuesday, I think both of their statuses are very much in the air. So it could be really interesting to see Peyton Bowen get some time at that cheetah position if that's what happens. And then offensively, again, I think it's going to be interesting to see the running back room, see the wide receiver room. But what's one thing you are looking for in a game that OU might, win pretty easily?
Well, just more consistency defensively, just to continue the consistent play that we've seen from them. I mean, Kevin Wilson, if you've been an Oklahoma fan or followed this team for any amount of time, or college football really in that matter, he's been synonymous with good offense for as long as he's been in the game. This guy, he is one of the best offensive minds that's come through college football since the turn of the century, and I don't think it's going to be long before Tulsa's offenses are really starting to ramp up again. Now, they don't necessarily have the pieces yet, in my opinion, to really give Oklahoma too much of a scare, but this is a team that is going to be very well prepared whenever it comes to on offensive game plan. And so we need to see more consistency from the defense as we finish out the non-conference slate. But offensively, I think the big thing that stood out for me this week in talks with in the press conferences was I think I heard a couple of coaches say that the offensive line was really upset with themselves with how they played last week. There were times where Dylan Gabriel was under some pressure he shouldn't have been, or maybe the holes that weren't there that should have been for the running game. And so, I think this is an opportunity for more of a confidence building game, but not just that, but to get your technique right, because you've got a lot of things coming up. Like I said, a lot of defensive lines that are going to be really big tests going forward. So if you're going to get things right, it's going to have to come now. It needs to come this week, and I think that the offensive line knows that, and that's probably something that Coach Bedenbaugh is really pushing this week in practice.
Really glad you mentioned the offensive line. We talked to Walter Rouse on Tuesday, and he was transparent. He was like, we're frustrated. We're upset. We didn't play as well as we should have. So I think that's going to be really interesting to watch. And again, offensively, I think this is going to be a game, especially if it turns into a blowout. It is going to be interesting to see how the carries are split, especially if this ends up being, it's a lot of runs if OU's really relying on that running game. But also wide receiver wise, only three players caught a pass last week. Does OU make a really concerted effort to get those guys involved, or to get Nick Anderson, Gavin Freeman, Jaden Gibson, some other guys in that room involved, maybe Jalil Farouk? Do they get more targets his way? He hasn't really exploded yet. And then defensively, I think it's going to see, we might see a lot of young guys in bigger roles, which has kind of been, Kip Lewis has seen a lot of snaps. Kobe McKenzie has seen a lot of snaps, but Peyton Bowen, I think you and I and a lot of people are seeing that guy's a stud. That guy's going to be big time. And if Justin Harrington and Deshaun McCullough can't go, this could be our first look at Peyton Bowen at that cheetah position, where that's a hard position. That's a tough position. There's a lot of responsibilities there. So again, even if it is a blowout, it should be really fun to watch. There should be a lot of things to watch. And obviously, Kevin Wilson, the former OU offensive coordinator, you wrote about that at OUinsider.com. He and Brent Venables were both on staff together. Should be fun, at least from that regard, to reminisce. Brian, last thing, quickly, if you have a prediction, I think OU is a 27-point favorite. What is your score prediction for Saturday?
So I'd like to say that Oklahoma goes over 50 points here and gets back to winning in a big way. I do think that they're going to cover. I'm going to go 47. Let's go 47-13. I think that the offense is going to get back on track. But I do see what limits Oklahoma this week is potentially the clock, because I do expect them to try and run the football and establish a run this week. They need to do that. They need to gain some confidence doing that. And if they're going to put Javonte Barnes and Gavin Sawchuk in a position to get some more carries, it's going to take time. So I'll go 47-13 Sooners.
I think that's a good one. I'm going to say around those lines, I'm going to say 42-14. OU just barely covers. But again, I think maybe the second half is maybe it slows down a little bit. But either way, Brian, that is going to do it for us here at the Oklahoma Drill. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. You can find us at Spotify, Apple Music, or YouTube, anywhere you get your podcast. If you're not a subscriber to the OU Insider YouTube channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Or if you're not a VIP over at OUinsider.com, come check us out. You'll find all kinds of recruiting and team content from all of us there at OU Insider. So until Saturday's game against Tulsa, my name is Jesse Crittenden. That is Brian Clinton. We'll see you next time.